What's up, guys? Hope you guys are all having a fantastic day out in your worlds. I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to swing by the channel and check out a video. We're talking Rambo First Blood Part 2 today, but there's so much action in this movie, I cannot do it by myself. I have a special guest joining me today as we blow through these Rambo films. You can also go back on his channel and check out the first video. I have Christopher Durbin from Durbania. What's going on?
What's up, Anthony? Thank you so much for having me on the silver screen analysis to continue our epic Rambo reviews. I'm excited to be on your channel.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's going to be a great time. Like I said, we're going to be going through all these Rambo movies. Now, we have a little bit of a difference to this one. I kind of grew up watching these movies. I grew up with them throughout my childhood and my teenage years into my adult years. Christopher, on the other hand, watched through the series on this first time just recently, so we're kind of getting that dual perspective on this franchise, and this film is the one that definitely took a little bit of a turn. It's definitely much more excessive in the action. So first, let's just start off with you. What did you think after watching The First Blood the first time, seeing how gritty and how grounded it was? What did you think when you just got this completely different style of action movie?
This is what I thought the first Rambo movie was gonna be. So I was just like, oh, this is where my ideas for the first movie came from. Oh, I get it now. There was a lot of things that I liked about it. It is kind of interesting that you could go into the first one and it's more character driven. It's diving into, you know, post-traumatic stress and, you know, police officers abusing their power and things like that. Then you go into this one and it's just straight up action. And there's a degree that I liked it because I came into this with the base, kind of knowing a little bit more about Rambo and his character and kind of what he's made of and what's going on inside. On the other hand, they didn't really touch on that anymore and just wanted to showcase this dude as the action star that he is. And I was like, oh, I mean, it wasn't bad.
It's a classic. It's the epitome of 80s action to me. This was the first Rambo movie that I ever watched. This is the first introduction I had to the character, so going back later and watching the first film, it was kind of a surprise on the other side of it. It was much more serious, but something that I did like. This movie, the story is kind of it's not the most intricate. There isn't a lot of exploration of the character, but there's a lot of use of pyrotechnics. There's a lot of use of action movie tropes. A lot of bullets being shot off in this movie, and it's one that I also really do enjoy going back to watch because of just the practical locations. It really takes you into the jungles. Rambo kind of seems a lot more comfortable with his place. His emotional torment seems kind of more useful for just monologues and to kind of deliver some lines, you know, like if you want to win a war, you got to become war. But, you know, if you want something that just has some, you know, pedal to the floor action that doesn't shut off, you get a little bit of everything in this one. You get plenty of Rambo running, you get plenty of Rambo shooting people down. This is where he got his one-man army moniker, and there's pretty much things blowing up from start to finish in this movie. So what did you think of it all?
You know, honestly, I thought it was kind of cool to put Rambo in that element and see him act in that element. I mean, when you go into that first one and there he is in that woods in Oregon and he's, you know, taking out the officers and stuff like that, you're like saying, wow, this dude has got a lot of training. You can really see what a Green Beret is, how he's learned to ignore pain and do this and do that. You kind of see how tough he is, but it's kind of interesting to now put him back in Nam and put him back in that environment and kind of see him feeling more at home because, you know, like you said, if you want to fight a war, you got to become war. So to see him actually become war in this environment that traumatized him, this environment that made him, and so in a sense, it's like he's come home, which I think it's in this movie they say that, like, this was his home. It was kind of interesting to put him in that environment for me. And so it kind of made sense out of the idea that now this one is just the pure 80s action film. Because to me, that felt like the good excuse to make it that. And kind of interesting how, once again, they wanted to ignore him. He comes back home in the first movie, and everybody's ignoring him. They're ignoring his service. They're ignoring what he sacrificed for his country. He comes to Vietnam to take pictures of these POWs to prove that they're there, so a special team will come in and save them. But it turns out you have that dude who just kind of wants to save face and sweep all of this under the rug and yet again ignore Rambo. So even though this one isn't as deep, it still touches on that enough for me that it gives the character a bit more depth.
Little bit, just enough to make the action scenes work. And it's kind of unfortunate because when you look at the story and you have him kind of going to do this like dog and pony show for the government to try to send them to a base or a village that they thought was going to be empty, and then it ends up not being empty. He ends up finding some POWs, getting left behind. There's really some opportunity to dive into the character a little bit more. I think they could have maybe toned down the action a little bit if they wanted to make a film that people would have took more seriously, but they went the other way with it. It's got a little bit of a love interest in there as well, so it gives them that bit of revenge. It gives them that same kind of trope with like the Brian Dennehy's character in the first film, where there's some guy that's on the other end that he's got to go back and stand eye to eye with. So I mean, it kind of works. I mean, I like it for the action parts, but I really would have preferred like it had just a little bit more layering and a little bit more depth to the story.
Yeah, I think I agree with you because, my first experience watching this was to watch First Blood. And then the next day, like 24 hours later, I'm watching First Blood Part 2. And it's kind of jarring. It's like, on the one hand, I kind of see the continuity and the PTSD that he's struggling with and dealing with. But then I can also see more clearly where, they only used it sort of towards the beginning and then dropped it and made this a pure action film where it's like, they must have received some form of criticism for the first one and decided in this one, let's do less depth and let's do the quintessential 80s movie. We got to showcase his sweaty muscles. We got to show more of the big giant knife. And we got to show like how tough he is, how he can handle everything. Like, when he's in that little swamp thing with leeches all over him. I mean, I was ready to throw up right there, but he's the tough guy. So he's good. Yeah, he can handle that. There they are tying him to that mattress and electrocuting him. But you know what? He can handle that. And I was like, fascinating.
It definitely was like they were trying to steer him. I know Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger came out, I think, the same year as this film. So it was almost like they were trying to create this larger-than-life character that definitely was a different turn from the first film. But as a kid growing up, I mean, this was all I knew of Rambo. I mean, seeing Rambo standing there holding that rocket launcher is Rambo to me. I mean, it's they created a cartoon off of Rambo where he went and fought crimes and injustice, and it had that same kind of intro. So this is where it kind of made the character larger than life. And I think the first film was very contained, but then once you bring Rambo out into just international locations with just extreme amounts of action, it really turned Rambo, the character, into like a global star, like one of the horror icons like Freddy or Jason. It turned him into something that was lasting. It became his next Rocky Balboa character, and he really, the self-awareness from Stallone in this film is fantastic. I mean, he's hamming it up at basically every moment, and it's like if this film was to come out now, people would just completely skewer it. But I mean, when it came out, it was like one of the highest grossing movies of the year. It was everything that you wanted from an action lead, and he does a lot of his own stunts. So I mean, it's fun to go back and watch it. There's not you go back and watch it. The camera work is actually pretty good because it doesn't have to do a lot of cutting. I mean, it doesn't have to do a lot of jump cuts to kind of mask stuntmen, and it makes it kind of fun to go back and watch. It's nostalgic for me.
Oh yeah, I think probably one of my favorite moments, probably because of how unrealistic it is. He grabs the barbed wire and lifts it up with all of his strength and might, and he's like, "Yeah, no problem." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me." I will say the thing that was kind of interesting is the stark contrast. The first one had something memorable. It had a point that was made, and this one just did not. And I guess you could kind of say that's a negative. But it really does, I guess, depend on the lens with which you watch this. Like you said, in the 80s, this is one of the highest grossing movies that came out that year. Because it's like, my gosh, I mean, how cool was this in the 80s? How cool was it to get an action hero and get this kind of action-packed sequences? So I think it depends on your expectations and lens when you go in there. First one threw me off, so I didn't know what to expect anymore with a Rambo movie. And this one, I was like, oh, that's what I expected. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, sitting in front of the television watching this movie as a kid and just seeing the things that Rambo was doing after already seeing him as Rocky just made him larger than life. I mean, I probably watched this movie over 100 times in the 80s and then watched it even more in the 90s. And then that's why, as a kid, it was like, even though like Rambo 3 is not so good, it's like, it's got more Rambo moments in it. So as a kid, I would even watch that more than First Blood. But as I've gotten older, it's like I appreciate that first film so much differently than I do the rest of the movies, but it's kind of like you said, it's interesting to think like if you had a franchise now where a couple years ago this movie came out that was super serious and super intense came out, and then the sequel was to come out a few years later and it had such a completely different tone.
Oh, the internet would hate it. The internet would hate that shift in tone so much. I mean, come on, look from Force Awakens to Last Jedi and look at what the internet did. I mean, if you tried to make it like that now, it just wouldn't work. The internet would just be so angry that you did something so thoughtful and so unique in the first one and then went kind of generic for the second one. The internet would be unforgiving.
And it's like, I guess the 80s were a simpler time. They just give the people what they want, you know?
Yes.
So to wrap it up here and grading this movie, what would you give it on a letter grade?
You know, this is me coming into this fresh after having just watched the first one. I think I'm going to give it a C+. I think I agree that if I was a kid and I watched this, I probably would have given it like an A- or something, because as a kid, yeah, how cool to see him wield that knife and lift up the barbed wire fences and all of the explosions. Heck yeah. Kind of as a grown-up though, and kind of appreciating what they did with the first one, I feel like this one just didn't have anything that made it stand out or unique for me. Still entertaining and still enjoyable though.
Completely agree. I can see your point. As a kid growing up watching it, I would have to give this movie a solid A-. It created my love of action movies and my love of just the 80s practical effects and just one-liners, and just seeing him with his explosive tipped arrows blowing up these little huts that look like they got...
Those were cool.
They look like they got
Those
like
were cool.
500 gallons of gasoline inside of them, or those explosive tips are like atom bombs. It's completely unrealistic, but it's like, I loved it. I just couldn't get enough of it as a kid. So yeah, my grade's definitely going to be higher, but I can see there's even other 80s movies that I go back and watch now that I didn't have that fond nostalgia of growing up, and they just don't hit for me. So yeah, that's it for today, guys. That's Rambo First Blood Part 2. Make sure to check out Durbania. We have the First Blood review over on his channel. Tomorrow we're going to be talking all things Rambo 3 over on his channel. I'm going to leave all the links down in the description box. Durbin, let them know where they can find you.
You can find me on YouTube. Just search Durbania. You'll find my channel where I do a lot of movie reviews. I do some rankings. I do this thing called a theological analysis where I like to get really deep with movies and pick them apart. So a lot of fun. Would love to have you come over check it out. You can find me on Twitter at World of Durbania, or just search Durbania on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to talk Rambo 3, guys. I hope to see you guys all back there, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, drop it a thumbs up, leave a comment below. I'd love to talk movies with you guys. Share it with your friends, and without question, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can never miss a video. Here are some links to some recent reviews just in case you missed them. All my social media links and the link to our official website are down in the description below, and I'll catch you next time.